At 58 years old, Linda believed the difficult part of life was already behind her. The hard work had been done. The career years, the sleepless nights raising children, the decades of paying bills and building stability. She thought she had reached the stage of life where things finally slowed down, where the future became predictable, comfortable, safe. She had been married for 31 years. Their house was nearly paid off. Their retirement accounts were growing. And every year her husband reassured her that everything was on track. Linda trusted him, because for 3 decades, he had always been the one handling the finances, the investments, the taxes, the retirement planning. He was the organized one, the planner, the numbers person. Linda focused on the family. It seemed like a perfect balance, until one afternoon, when 4 simple words changed everything. "I want a divorce." The sentence landed quietly, but the consequences were anything but quiet. Within 12 months, Linda's retirement savings would be cut in half. The house she loved would be sold, and the life she thought was secure would suddenly become uncertain. But the most shocking moment of the entire story did not happen during the divorce. It happened 3 months later, when Linda opened her financial accounts alone for the first time and saw numbers she had never truly understood before. Linda met Mark when she was 24 years old. He was steady, responsible, the type of man who kept detailed lists and always arrived early. Linda was warmer, more spontaneous, more focused on people than numbers. In the early years of their marriage, this difference actually worked well. Mark liked managing the finances, tracking expenses, planning for the future. Linda was happy to let him handle it, so they created an unspoken system. Mark handled the money. Linda handled the family. And for many years, the system worked. They bought a house in a quiet neighborhood, raised 2 children, watched their lives slowly expand. The house filled with memories, birthday parties, holiday dinners, school graduations, lazy Sunday mornings. Over time, their financial life also seemed to grow stronger. Every year Mark would review their accounts, investment statements, retirement balances, tax documents. Sometimes Linda would ask a simple question: "Are we doing okay?" Mark always smiled. "We're doing great." And Linda believed him, because trust in your partner is part of marriage. But there was something Linda didn't realize, something millions of people discover too late. When only one person understands the finances, the other person becomes financially dependent. Even in a loving relationship, even in a stable marriage. And sometimes, that dependency stays hidden for decades, until something breaks. For most of their marriage, Linda believed everything was normal, stable, predictable. But looking back, she now remembers the first small changes. They started slowly, almost invisibly. Mark began traveling more for work. Conferences, client meetings, late flights. At first it didn't seem unusual. Many careers become more demanding over time. Linda supported him, encouraged him. But something else changed as well. The financial conversations disappeared. For years, Mark had occasionally mentioned their investments. A comment about the stock market. An update about their retirement account. A casual remark about saving more. Those conversations quietly stopped. Weeks passed. Then months. Then years. Linda noticed. But she didn't question it. Because silence around money can feel like stability. If nothing is being discussed, maybe nothing is wrong. But sometimes, silence hides something else. And Linda would only understand that years later. Because the biggest surprise wasn't the divorce itself. It was what came after. The day everything changed felt completely ordinary. It was a Sunday afternoon. Linda had just finished washing dishes. The kitchen smelled faintly of coffee. Mark was sitting at the table. He looked calm. Too calm. "Can we talk?" he asked. Linda sat down across from him. She expected something routine. Maybe a discussion about work. Maybe family plans. Instead, Mark took a slow breath. "I'm not happy anymore." The sentence felt strange. Confusing. 31 years of marriage doesn't suddenly end with a sentence like that. Linda waited. But the next words came quickly. "I want a divorce." The room felt quiet. Unbreathable. Linda later said the moment felt like time slowing down. Like watching life from outside her own body. 31 years. 2 children. 3 decades of shared history. All suddenly reduced to a single conversation. There was no dramatic argument. No shouting. Just a calm declaration. And a silence that followed. But what Linda didn't understand yet was that the emotional shock of divorce would soon be replaced by something else. Something colder. Something more practical. The financial reality. Divorce at a younger age is difficult. But divorce later in life creates a different kind of challenge. Experts even have a name for it. They call it gray divorce. And over the last 20 years, it has become much more common. Couples who spent decades together, suddenly separating in their 50s or 60s. But statistics don't always explain the most painful part. Because when younger couples divorce, they still have time to rebuild financially. 10 years, 20 years, sometimes 30. But after 50, time becomes the most valuable resource. Retirement is already approaching. Savings are already allocated. Plans are already built. And when those plans suddenly split in half, the numbers change dramatically. Linda learned this during her first meeting with a divorce lawyer. The conversation quickly turned to finances. Retirement accounts. Savings. Home equity. Everything had to be divided. Half for him. Half for her. On paper, it sounded fair. But real life rarely works that simply, because two households are always more expensive than one. Two rents, two utility bills, two insurance policies, two separate lives. And suddenly, Linda realized something terrifying. The retirement she thought was secure might no longer exist. If there was one thing Linda hoped to keep, it was the house. Not because it was large, not because it was luxurious, but because it held 30 years of memories. Her children's first steps, birthday celebrations, Christmas mornings, long family dinners. The house wasn't just a building. It was the physical record of their entire life together. But during divorce negotiations, memories don't appear on financial spreadsheets. Assets do. And the house was the largest asset they owned. To keep it, Linda would need to buy out Mark's half. That meant taking a large mortgage. At 58 years old, her financial advisor looked at the numbers carefully, then said something Linda didn't want to hear. Keeping the house could destroy your retirement. The words felt brutal, but they were honest. A mortgage that large would consume most of her income, leaving almost nothing for savings. Linda spent weeks thinking about the decision, walking through each room, remembering moments, trying to imagine life somewhere else. Eventually, she accepted the truth. The house had to be sold. Letting go of it felt like losing the final piece of her old life. But an even bigger realization was waiting just around the corner. Because 3 months later, Linda did something she had never done before. She looked at all the financial accounts alone. And what she saw changed everything. 3 months after the divorce, Linda sat in her new apartment. It was smaller, quieter, half the size of the home she left behind. Many of her belongings were still in boxes. That evening, she opened her laptop, logged into the financial accounts, and looked at the numbers. For the first time in her life, she wasn't looking at them with Mark. She was looking alone. Savings, retirement accounts, investment balances, monthly expenses, future projections. And suddenly, the numbers felt frightening, because dividing retirement savings late in life creates a painful reality. Half the savings, half the income, half the security, but the same cost of living, housing, food, insurance, healthcare, everything. For the first time in decades, Linda felt genuine financial fear, the kind that keeps people awake at night, the kind that makes the future feel uncertain. Many people in this moment feel defeated, like it's simply too late to change anything. But the following week, Linda made a decision that would quietly change the direction of her entire future. The morning after seeing the numbers, Linda barely slept. Her mind kept replaying the same thoughts. Was it too late to fix anything? Had she lost too much time? Most people imagine that financial fear comes from poverty, but often it comes from uncertainty, not knowing what the future will look like, not knowing if the plan will hold. Linda realized something uncomfortable that morning. For most of her adult life, she had trusted someone else to manage the financial future. Now that responsibility was entirely hers, and at first, that felt overwhelming. But a week later, she did something that quietly changed everything. She scheduled a meeting with a financial planner, not to complain, not to panic, just to understand. When the meeting began, she asked a simple question: "What can I still fix?" The advisor paused for a moment, then gave an answer Linda did not expect. "More than you think." The advisor explained that Linda's situation was difficult, but not hopeless. Her financial future could still be rebuilt, but it required 3 major changes. 3 decisions that many people avoid. First, she would likely need to work longer. Second, she needed to reduce her cost of living. Third, she needed to fully understand her own finances. For the first time in her life, none of those changes were easy. But something interesting happened as Linda listened. The fear she had felt for weeks began to soften, because fear grows strongest in uncertainty, and clarity changes everything. For the first time since the divorce, she felt a small sense of control returning. Linda began studying her finances the way a student studies a new subject. Slowly, carefully, sometimes with frustration. She learned how retirement accounts worked, how investment fees slowly reduce long-term growth, how Social Security benefits increase if you delay claiming them. These were things Mark had always handled. Now she was discovering them herself. At first, the process felt intimidating. Financial language can sound complicated, but over time, the patterns became clearer. Budget setting, saving, investing, planning. They weren't mysterious after all. They were simply systems. And once Linda understood those systems, something powerful happened. Her confidence grew. Because financial independence is not just about money. It's about understanding. And understanding removes fear. One of the first decisions Linda made was about retirement. Before the divorce, she expected to retire at 65. That had been the plan for years. But after reviewing her situation, her advisor suggested something different. Retire at 68 instead. 3 extra working years. At first, that idea felt discouraging. But when they ran the numbers, the difference was dramatic. 3 additional years meant more savings contributions, more time for investments to grow, and larger Social Security benefits. Those extra years created breathing room. Linda realized something important in that moment. Sometimes the most powerful financial decision is simply buying time. The next change involved lifestyle. Linda had already moved into a smaller apartment. At first it felt like a loss, but over time, she noticed something surprising. Her expenses dropped dramatically. Less maintenance, lower utilities, fewer unnecessary purchases. When she reviewed her monthly spending, Linda realized something she had never noticed before. Much of her previous spending had been automatic. Subscriptions, impulse purchases, things that once felt normal. Now she began asking a simple question before every purchase. Does this actually improve my life? If the answer was no, she didn't buy it. This new habit slowly changed her relationship with money. Spending became intentional, purposeful, and strangely, life began to feel lighter. Financial recovery is one thing. Emotional recovery is another. For many people, divorce after decades of marriage creates a deep sense of loss, not just for the relationship, but for the identity built around it. Linda experienced that as well. For months, simple routines felt different. Cooking dinner, watching television, weekend mornings. Everything reminded her of the life that had changed. But something else slowly emerged. Freedom. For the first time in decades, Linda made every decision on her own. How she spent money, how she organized her time, what her future would look like. That independence felt strange at first, but eventually it felt empowering. About a year after the divorce, Linda noticed a change in herself. She no longer avoided financial conversations. In fact, she began helping her friends understand their own finances. Sometimes over coffee, sometimes during long phone calls. She shared what she had learned, how retirement accounts worked, why budgeting mattered, why every partner in a marriage should understand the finances. Her friends were often surprised, because many of them had the same arrangement Linda once had. One spouse handled the money, the other trusted them, and that trust can work perfectly until something unexpected happens. Linda never wanted anyone else to feel the fear she felt that night in her apartment, looking at numbers she didn't fully understand. 2 years after the divorce, Linda's life looked very different, but it no longer felt unstable. She had rebuilt her financial plan. Her expenses were under control. Her retirement timeline was realistic. Most importantly, she understood her own money. Every account, every investment, every decision. The future was no longer a mystery, and that clarity created something she hadn't expected. Peace of mind. When people hear Linda's story, they often focus on the divorce, the emotional shocks, the life change. But Linda believes the most important lesson is something else entirely: financial awareness. Because money is deeply connected to independence. When you understand your finances, you protect yourself, not only from bad investments, but from unexpected life changes. Divorce, illness, job loss. Life is unpredictable, but preparation makes those moments survivable. Today, when Linda talks with younger couples, she shares 3 pieces of advice. Simple advice, but powerful. First, Both partners should understand the finances. Even if one person manages them day to day, knowledge should never belong to only one person. Second, retirement planning should be reviewed together, at least once a year. Not just to check numbers, but to understand them. And third, never assume financial stability will last forever, because life changes. Sometimes suddenly. Preparation is protection. Today, Linda is 62 years old. She still works, but she enjoys her work. She still saves, but now she understands every dollar. Her retirement will not look exactly the way she once imagined, but it will still exist. And perhaps more importantly, she feels confident about it. Confidence that comes from understanding, not assumption. When Linda looks back on the moment Mark asked for the divorce, she remembers the shocks, the fear, the uncertainty. But she also recognizes something else. That moment forced her to learn things she might never have learned otherwise. About money, about independence, about resilience. Life after 50 is often described as a time of stability, but sometimes it becomes a time of reinvention. And Linda's story proves something important. Starting over financially is never easy, especially later in life. But it is possible. With knowledge, with discipline, and with the willingness to face reality instead of avoiding it. Because in the end, financial security is not something we inherit. It is something we build. And sometimes, the strongest financial foundation is the one we build after everything else falls apart.